Hello dear listener, please subscribe to our channel. Enjoy watching. The morning began like any other in the quiet suburb of Newport. The air was crisp, and the sun's rays filtered through the dense fog that blanketed the town, creating an ethereal glow. Jack Pearson awoke in his king-size bed, feeling a sense of unease that he couldn't quite place. The clock on his nightstand read 6:30 a.m., and his wife, Emily, was still sleeping soundly beside him, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She looked peaceful, but Jack couldn't shake the knot forming in his stomach. As he got up to start his day, the feeling of dread only intensified. Jack was a methodical man, known for his attention to detail and his unerring sense of intuition. For over 20 years, he had worked as a high-profile architect, designing some of the most iconic buildings in the city. His life was built on structure and order, yet today, everything felt off-kilter. After a quick shower, Jack made his way downstairs to the kitchen. The house was eerily quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. He brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen island, staring into the dark liquid as if it held the answers to the questions swirling in his mind. Emily joined him a few minutes later, dressed in her usual morning attire, an oversized sweater and leggings. She greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, her smile warm and familiar, but Jack could see the tension in her eyes. "Morning, love," she said softly, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "You seem a bit distant today. Everything okay?" Jack forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind. Big presentation today at the firm." Emily frowned slightly, but didn't press the issue. She knew better than to pry when Jack was in one of his moods. Instead, she busied herself with preparing breakfast, eggs, toast, and bacon, their usual fare. As they ate in silence, Jack's thoughts drifted back to the previous evening. They had hosted a small dinner party for some of Jack's colleagues. It was a pleasant evening, filled with laughter and good conversation, but Jack had noticed something strange. Emily had been unusually quiet, almost withdrawn, and she had excused herself to the bathroom more times than he could count. At the time, he had brushed it off, assuming she was just tired, but now, in the harsh light of day, the pieces weren't adding up. "Emily," Jack began, setting his fork down. "Last night, you seemed off. Is everything okay?" Emily looked up from her plate, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine, Jack. Just tired, that's all." Jack nodded, though he wasn't convinced. He decided not to push her further, but the unease gnawing at his insides wouldn't go away. After breakfast, Jack kissed Emily goodbye and headed out the door. The drive to his office downtown was uneventful, but his mind was racing. At the office, Jack tried to focus on his work, but the growing sense of dread made it difficult. His thoughts kept drifting back to Emily, to the way she had been acting lately. He couldn't pinpoint when it had started, but over the past few months, she had become more distant, more secretive. She was always on her phone, texting someone late at night, and she had started taking trips to visit her sister more frequently, trips that Jack now wondered if they were really as innocent as she claimed. Around noon, Jack received a call from his boss, Tom Alcott, summoning him to his office. Tom was a gruff, no-nonsense type of man, the kind who didn't waste time with pleasantries. Jack knocked on the door and entered, finding Tom seated behind his massive mahogany desk, a deep frown etched into his face. "Jack, close the door," Tom said, his tone serious. Jack complied, feeling a pang of anxiety. Tom wasn't usually this somber. "What's going on, Tom?" Jack asked, taking a seat. Tom sighed, rubbing his temples. "We've got a situation, Jack. It's not good." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Tom leaned forward, his expression grave. "It's about your wife, Emily." Jack's blood ran cold. "What about her?" Tom hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I wasn't going to tell you this, Jack, but I think you need to know. There have been rumors going around the office." Jack's stomach churned. "Rumors? About what?" Tom exhaled slowly. About Emily. And someone else. A colleague. Jack felt like he had been punched in the gut. Who? He demanded, his voice trembling with anger. Tom shook his head. I don't want to believe it, Jack, but I've heard it from multiple sources. They say she's been seeing someone else, behind your back. I don't know who, but they say it's serious. Jack was speechless, his mind reeling from the revelation. He had suspected something was wrong, but to hear it confirmed was a blow he hadn't been prepared for. Do you know who it is? Jack finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom shook his head again. I don't know, Jack. But if I were you, I'd find out. Before it's too late. Jack left Tom's office in a daze, his world spinning out of control. He felt like he was in a nightmare, one he couldn't wake up from. The rest of the day passed in a blur, and by the time he got home, he was seething with rage. Emily was already home, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in hand. She looked up when Jack walked in, her smile fading when she saw the expression on his face. Jack, what's wrong? She asked, her voice laced with concern. Don't play dumb, Emily, Jack snapped, his anger boiling over. I know what you've been up to. Emily's eyes widened in shock. What are you talking about? Jack clenched his fists, trying to control his temper. Don't lie to me, Emily. I know you've been seeing someone else. Emily's face went pale. Jack, I can explain. Explain? Jack interrupted, his voice rising. How do you explain betraying me? How do you explain throwing away 20 years of marriage? Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. Jack, please, just let me explain. I don't want to hear it. Jack shouted, his rage finally erupting. I trusted you, Emily. I loved you. And this is how you repay me? Emily broke down in tears, sobbing uncontrollably. Jack couldn't stand to look at her. He turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. He got in his car and drove aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of what had happened. When he finally returned home, it was past midnight. Emily was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up when Jack walked in, her expression filled with sorrow and regret. Jack, please, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Let me explain. Jack sighed, his anger drained from him. Fine. Explain. Emily took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. It started a few months ago. I met him at a charity event. We started talking, and things just spiraled from there. I never meant for it to happen, Jack. I swear. It was just a mistake. A mistake? Jack repeated, his voice laced with bitterness. You call this a mistake? Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, it was a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you, Jack. I never wanted any of this. Jack stared at her, his heart breaking. He had loved this woman more than anything, and now she was confessing to an affair. He felt like his world had been shattered into a million pieces. Who is he? Jack finally asked, his voice hollow. Emily hesitated, then finally spoke. His name is David. David Collins. He's a lawyer. Jack's heart sank. David Collins was one of the most successful lawyers in the city, a man Jack had always admired. And now he was the man who had stolen his wife. Where did you meet him? Jack asked, his voice barely audible. Emily swallowed hard. At the charity event, like I said. He was charming, and I was lonely, Jack. You were always so busy with work, and I felt like you didn't have time for me anymore. Jack closed his eyes, trying to process everything. He felt like his heart had been ripped out of his chest. You should have come to me, Emily, Jack said, his voice trembling. You should have told me how you were feeling, instead of running to someone else. Emily nodded, her tears flowing freely. I know, Jack. I'm sorry. I was weak. I made a mistake, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Jack stared at her, his mind racing. He didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to forgive her, to try and salvage their marriage. But another part of him wanted to make her pay, to make her feel the same pain he was feeling. He knew he couldn't let this go. He couldn't let her betrayal go unpunished. Jack took a deep breath, his mind made up. "Emily, I need some time to think. I need to be alone." Emily nodded, her expression filled with sorrow. "I understand, Jack. Take all the time you need." Jack turned and walked out of the kitchen, his heart heavy with anger and pain. He knew what he had to do, but he needed time to plan. He needed time to figure out how to make Emily and David pay for what they had done. Over the next few days, Jack avoided Emily as much as possible. He spent his time at work, throwing himself into his projects to distract himself from the pain. But the anger inside him continued to fester, growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, as Jack sat in his office, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, but the message made his blood run cold. Asterisk, "I know what you're planning, Jack." "Don't do it." Asterisk, Jack stared at the message, his heart racing. Who could have sent it? How did they know? He quickly deleted the message and tried to push it out of his mind, but the warning continued to haunt him. Was someone watching him? Was someone trying to stop him? He decided to be more careful, to cover his tracks. He knew he couldn't let anyone interfere with his plans. Days turned into weeks, and Jack continued to play the role of the dutiful husband. Emily seemed to believe that he had forgiven her, that they were working on rebuilding their marriage. But Jack knew better. He knew that he couldn't rest until he had exacted his revenge. He began to gather information on David Collins, using his connections to dig up every piece of dirt he could find. David was a man with a spotless reputation, but Jack knew that no one was truly clean. Everyone had skeletons in their closet, and he was determined to find David's. And then he found it. It was a small detail, something that had been buried in David's past. A scandal involving a client, a case that had been quietly settled out of court. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Jack knew he could use it to ruin David's career, to destroy everything he had worked for. But Jack wasn't satisfied with just ruining David's career. He wanted to make him suffer, to feel the same pain and betrayal that he had felt. He wanted to destroy his life, his relationships, everything. He spent weeks planning his revenge, carefully setting the pieces in place. He made sure that every detail was perfect, that nothing could go wrong. And then, when everything was ready, he put his plan into action. The first part of the plan was simple. Jack leaked the details of the scandal to the press, ensuring that it would be front-page news. The media had a field day, and David's reputation was in tatters within hours. His clients began to drop him, his law firm distanced themselves from him, and his career was all but over. But Jack didn't stop there. He wanted to destroy David personally, to take away everything that mattered to him. He began to sabotage David's relationships, planting seeds of doubt and mistrust in the minds of those closest to him. He spread rumors, forged documents, and created situations that would make David look guilty of things he hadn't done. David's life began to unravel. His friends turned against him, his family disowned him, and he found himself alone, with no one to turn to. And then, Jack made his final move. He arranged a meeting with David, under the pretense of discussing the situation. David, desperate and broken, agreed to meet him at a secluded location. When David arrived, Jack was waiting for him. He could see the fear and desperation in David's eyes, and it filled him with a dark satisfaction. "Why are you doing this?" David asked, his voice trembling. Jack smiled coldly. "You took something from me, David. Something I can never get back. And now, I'm taking everything from you." David stared at him, realization dawning in his eyes. "This is about Emily, isn't it? I never meant for this to happen, Jack. I never wanted to hurt you." Jack's smile faded, replaced by a look of pure hatred. "It's too late for apologies, David. You destroyed my life, and now I'm destroying yours." Before David could react, Jack pulled out a gun and shot him in the chest. David collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, his life slipping away. Jack stood over him, watching as the light faded from his eyes. It was done. David was dead, and Jack had his revenge. But as he walked away, leaving David's lifeless body behind, Jack felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. All he felt was emptiness, a hollow void where his heart used to be. He had destroyed the man who had ruined his life, but in doing so, he had destroyed himself as well. He had become consumed by his desire for revenge, and now there was nothing left. As he drove away, the city lights fading in the distance, Jack realized that he had lost everything. His wife, his career, his soul. All that remained were the echoes of betrayal, haunting him for the rest of his days. If you leave a comment, tell us what you think about the story you heard. It's important to us and will help us find and tell stories that you find interesting. Thank you for watching us.